The scream cut through the farmer's market before I even understood what I was looking at. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, being dragged by the wrist toward a black van idling at the curb, her small sneakers scraping uselessly against the pavement while a man in a gray jacket clamped a hand over her mouth. I didn't think. I didn't calculate the danger or consider what a reasonable person would do. I dropped the basket of peaches I'd been holding, closed the distance in 4 strides, and threw my entire body weight into the man's shoulder hard enough to send us both sprawling across a table of heirloom tomatoes. That single decision, made in under 2 seconds on an ordinary Saturday morning, was about to bring the most dangerous man in the city to my apartment door before midnight. If you've ever wondered what happens after you do the right thing without thinking about the consequences, stay with me tonight, because what came knocking on my door that evening changed absolutely everything I thought I understood about safety, danger, and the particular kind of man who shows up to say thank you. My name is Elise Harper. I'm 28 years old. I teach 3rd grade at a public elementary school 2 blocks from my apartment, and until that Saturday morning, the most dangerous thing that had ever happened to me was slipping on ice outside my building and spraining my wrist. I'd gone to the Saturday farmer's market the way I always did, for peaches and a strong coffee and 20 minutes of pretending my life was more interesting than grading spelling tests and grocery budgets. I wasn't looking for trouble. I wasn't looking for anything except decent produce and a reason to leave my apartment before the loneliness of another empty weekend fully settled in. The girl's scream changed all of that in an instant. I didn't know, tackling that man across a folding table of tomatoes, that the little girl was Bianca Moretti, the only daughter of Matteo Moretti, a name that made grown men in expensive suits go quiet in restaurants across 3 states. I didn't know that the attempted kidnapping wasn't random at all, but a calculated strike by a rival organization looking to gain leverage over one of the most powerful men in the city. I knew only that a child was terrified, and that I had 2 working arms and absolutely no capacity to stand by and watch. The man I tackled recovered fast, shoving me hard enough that I hit the pavement and felt the wind leave my lungs entirely. But the collision had bought exactly enough time. A second man, already dragging Bianca toward the van, hesitated at the sudden chaos, and in that hesitation, a market vendor built like a linebacker grabbed him from behind while 3 more bystanders converged on the scene. The van's driver, watching his operation collapse in real time, gunned the engine and fled, leaving both men behind to be tackled, restrained, and eventually handed over to police who arrived within 4 minutes. Bianca Moretti sat on the curb afterward, wrapped in someone's jacket, shaking but unhurt, and I sat beside her holding her hand because nobody else seemed to know quite what to do with a traumatized 6-year-old until her family arrived. "You're safe now," I told her over and over, the way you tell a child something true enough times that it becomes true. "You're safe. I've got you." I had no idea, sitting on that curb with a stranger's daughter's hand in mine, that I had just placed myself directly and permanently into the orbit of a man whose enemies would soon consider me a target worth watching too. The rest of that Saturday passed in a blur of police statements, a concerned call from my sister after the local news picked up footage of the attempted abduction, and the particular exhausted adrenaline crash that comes after your body understands, several hours late, exactly how much danger it was actually in. I gave my statement to 2 detectives who seemed genuinely startled by how calmly I described tackling a grown man twice my size. I answered questions about what I'd seen, what I remembered about the van, whether I'd noticed anyone watching the market beforehand who seemed out of place. I told them everything I could, which wasn't much, and went home to my small apartment feeling shaky and strange and entirely unprepared for what evening would bring. The knock came just after 9 that night, 3 measured raps against my apartment door, and something in the particular weight of them made me check the peephole before opening it, an instinct I didn't normally bother with. The man standing in my hallway looked like he belonged on the cover of a magazine I'd never be able to afford to appear in myself. Tall, dark hair cut close and precise, a charcoal overcoat that fit him with the specific perfection of custom tailoring, and an expression that managed to be simultaneously composed and completely unreadable. Behind him stood 2 considerably larger men in dark suits, positioned with the deliberate stillness of people whose entire job was standing exactly where they were standing. I opened the door on the chain first, a small, useless gesture of caution given the situation. Miss Harper, the man said, his voice low and carrying an accent I couldn't immediately place, something that suggested a childhood spent somewhere considerably further from this city than most people I knew. My name is Matteo Moretti. I believe you spent this morning with my daughter. I should have been afraid. Every instinct I'd absorbed from 28 years of ordinary, careful living told me that a man arriving at my door with 2 silent bodyguards at 9 o'clock at night was not a situation that ended well for the person answering the door. Instead, standing there with the chain still latched, I felt something closer to recognition than fear, the particular clarity of finally meeting someone whose gravity you'd already felt without understanding its source. "Bianca," I said. "Is she all right?" "She is asleep," finally, after considerable effort. She would not stop talking about the woman who tackled a man across a table of tomatoes. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, but close enough to notice. "I came to thank you properly. May I come in, or would you prefer I say what I need to say through a locked door?" I unlatched the chain. Looking back, I understand exactly how foolish that decision might have looked from the outside. In the moment, it felt like the only decision available to me. He came in alone, instructing the 2 men in the hallway to wait outside with a single sentence in Italian I didn't understand but recognized immediately as an order rather than a request. My small living room, with its second-hand furniture and stack of ungraded spelling tests on the coffee table, suddenly felt considerably smaller with him standing in it. "You have no idea who I am," he said, not quite a question. "I have some idea," I admitted. "The way those 2 men outside are standing suggests you're not exactly an accountant." Something that was unmistakably a real smile crossed his face this time, brief and startling in how completely it changed his expression. "No, not an accountant." He told me plainly, without the careful evasion I might have expected from someone in his position, exactly what he was. His family controlled significant commercial interests across the East Coast. Interests that existed, he said carefully, considerably outside the boundaries most people considered legal. He did not use the word most people would use to describe men in his position, but he didn't need to. I understood well enough. "My daughter was targeted today specifically because of who I am," he continued, sitting across from me with the particular stillness of a man accustomed to controlling every room he entered. "A rival organization believes taking Bianca gives them leverage over decisions I would otherwise never make. This was not random. And you, Miss Harper, walked directly into the middle of it without a single moment's hesitation." "She was a child being dragged into a van," I said. "I didn't need to know anything else. Most people would have needed considerably more than that to risk what you risked today." He studied me with an intensity that should have felt invasive and instead felt, unsettlingly, like being genuinely seen for the first time in longer than I wanted to admit. "I came tonight to thank you. I also came to warn you, because I believe in honesty regarding consequences, even uncomfortable ones." "Warn me about what?" "The men who attempted to take my daughter today know your face. They know you interfered successfully with their plan. In my world, that makes you considerably more than an inconvenient witness." His jaw tightened slightly. "It makes you a loose end someone may decide needs resolving." The word resolving hung in the air between us with a weight I understood completely, despite him never once using a more explicit word for it. "I need you to understand the danger clearly," Matteo continued, his voice steady despite the gravity of what he was describing. "I have already arranged security to monitor this building discreetly, starting tonight. I would prefer, if you're willing, to arrange something more substantial until I've dealt with the people responsible for today." "Dealt with them how?" "That is not something I intend to discuss with you." He said it without cruelty, simply as a fact of the world he occupied. "But I can promise you they will no longer pose a threat to my daughter, or to you, once I've finished." I sat with that for a long moment, the particular vertigo of understanding that a man's calm, precise sentence about dealing with a threat likely meant something I genuinely didn't want detailed for me. "I have a job," I said finally. "A life. Third graders who need their teacher on Monday morning. I can't just disappear because of what happened today." "I'm not asking you to disappear." I'm asking you to allow reasonable precautions until the immediate danger has passed. He leaned forward slightly, and for the first time all evening, something like genuine vulnerability crossed his carefully composed features. My daughter asked me tonight, before she fell asleep, if the woman who saved her was going to be okay. I would like to be able to tell her yes with complete honesty. There was something in the way he said it, the particular weight a dangerous man carries when the thing he's actually afraid of is failing his child, that undid something careful in my chest. Okay, I said. Reasonable precautions. What does that actually mean? What it meant, over the following days, was a discreet security presence I rarely noticed unless I looked for it, a car that idled near my building overnight, a colleague of Matteo's named Rocco who introduced himself briefly as someone who'd be nearby if I needed anything at all, and, unexpectedly, Matteo himself, who began appearing with a consistency I hadn't anticipated and, if I was honest with myself, had begun quietly looking forward to. He brought Bianca to my classroom the following Wednesday, ostensibly so she could properly thank her rescuer, though I suspected the visit had as much to do with his own need to see for himself that I was genuinely unharmed. Bianca, 6 years old and entirely unbothered by the enormity of what had happened to her, presented me with a drawing of what appeared to be me tackling a stick figure across an elaborate spread of red circles she informed me were the tomatoes. "You're my superhero," she announced, with the absolute conviction only a 6-year-old can manage. "Papa says you're very brave." "Your papa is very kind," I said, glancing up to find Matteo watching the exchange with an expression I was beginning to recognize, something careful and guarded that occasionally slipped, just briefly, into something considerably warmer. "I say only what's true," he said quietly, once Bianca had wandered off to examine my classroom's reading corner with the same fearless curiosity she'd apparently brought to nearly everything else in her short life. "You are, in fact, very brave." I tackled a man over tomatoes. It wasn't exactly a calculated act of heroism. "The bravest things rarely are calculated," he said. "That's precisely what makes them brave." Over the following weeks, what began as necessary security precautions slowly, carefully, became something else entirely. Matteo would arrive some evenings with dinner from restaurants I'd never have been able to afford on a teacher's salary, always with some careful, understated reason attached, a security update, a question about Bianca's reading progress, a document requiring my signature related to the ongoing investigation. The reasons became, over time, increasingly transparent as excuses, and neither of us fully acknowledged that fact out loud for longer than either of us probably should have. "You could simply say you wanted to see me," I told him one evening, nearly a month after the market, as he unpacked containers of food across my small kitchen table with the same careful precision he seemed to bring to everything. "I could," he agreed, not looking up from the containers. "Why don't you?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Because a man in my position rarely gets to want things simply and openly. I have spent a great deal of my adult life being extremely careful about what I allow myself to want, Elise, because wanting things creates vulnerabilities, and vulnerabilities in my world are rarely survivable." "That sounds exhausting." "It is." He finally looked up, and the careful composure he wore so consistently slipped, just briefly, into something raw. "And yet here I am, in your kitchen, for the 4th time this week, telling myself I have a legitimate reason each time." "Do you?" "No," he admitted quietly. "I don't think I do anymore. I should have been more careful. Everything about my ordinary, uncomplicated life should have made me run from a man whose world involved security details and rival organizations and the kind of quiet, dangerous competence that let him discuss dealing with threats without ever raising his voice. My sister, when I finally told her the shape of what was happening, said exactly what I expected her to say. "You're describing a man who runs some kind of criminal organization, Elise, and you're telling me this like it's a meet-cute. It's complicated." "It's not complicated. It's dangerous. You could genuinely get hurt, and I'm not talking about heartbreak." Her voice carried the specific worry of an older sister who'd spent our whole lives watching out for me. "Please tell me you're being careful." "I'm being careful," I told her, though even as I said it, I understood I was already considerably further into something than careful people generally allowed themselves to get. The truth was, I couldn't fully explain to her, or to myself, exactly what drew me to Matteo Moretti beyond the obvious. It wasn't simply the danger, though I'd be lying if I claimed that had no pull at all. It was the specific way he listened when I talked, giving my ordinary stories about third graders and lesson plans the same careful, complete attention he presumably gave decisions that carried considerably higher stakes. It was watching him with Bianca, endlessly patient, endlessly gentle, a version of him I suspected almost no one else in his world ever got to witness. It was the particular, quiet honesty he'd offered from that very first night, refusing to soften or hide what he actually was, trusting me with a truth that could have ended everything before it began. The threat resurfaced nearly 6 weeks after the market, in the form of an envelope left at my classroom door with no return address, containing photographs of me leaving my apartment, walking to school, sitting with Matteo at a restaurant 2 nights earlier. A single typed note accompanied them. "We know exactly where she is. Tell Moretti his daughter isn't the only leverage available to him now." My hands were shaking by the time I finished reading it. I called Matteo immediately, my voice unsteady in a way I hated, and he arrived at my apartment within 20 minutes, his expression carrying a controlled fury I hadn't seen from him before. "This is the Castellano organization," he said, examining the photographs with a clinical precision that did nothing to hide the tension radiating from him. "They failed to take Bianca. Now they're attempting a different approach entirely. What do they actually want? Leverage. Control over territory disputes that have nothing to do with you at all, except that you've become, unfortunately, an effective way to threaten me." He set the photographs down carefully, and when he looked at me, something in his composure had genuinely cracked. "I need to move you somewhere secure. Tonight. Matteo, I have a job. Students who need. Elise." My name in his mouth carried a weight I'd never heard before, something between plea and command. "I understand your life matters to you, and I would never ask you to abandon it lightly. But I cannot protect you properly in an apartment with a single deadbolt and a security detail that patrols rather than remains stationed. Please. Just until this is resolved." I looked at the photographs spread across my coffee table, at evidence that strangers had been watching my ordinary life closely enough to document its smallest details, and I understood, with sudden clarity, exactly how far past careful I had already traveled. "Okay," I said. "Tell me what you need me to do." The safe house was a brownstone 2 blocks from where Matteo's mother lived, comfortable and thoroughly secured in ways I tried not to think too closely about. I stayed there for 11 days while Matteo worked, through channels he never fully explained to me, to neutralize the threat the Castellano organization posed. His mother, a formidable woman named Concetta who visited nearly every day during that stretch, became, unexpectedly, one of the steadiest presences in an otherwise unsteady stretch of my life. "He has not brought a woman to meet me in over a decade," she told me on the 3rd day, settling into the armchair across from mine with the particular unhurried confidence of someone who had survived considerably worse than a rival family's threats. "You should understand what that means." "I'm not sure I do." "It means my son has decided, whether he has said the words yet or not, that you matter more than his own careful rules about vulnerability." She studied me with sharp, assessing eyes that reminded me, unsettlingly, of Matteo's own. "Are you prepared for what loving a man like my son actually requires?" "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "I don't think anyone could fully be prepared for this." "No," Concetta agreed, something almost gentle crossing her weathered features. "But some people are worth the unpreparedness anyway. I think, perhaps, you might be exactly that kind of worth it for him." Matteo called on the 11th night with 3 words that released a tension I hadn't fully realized I'd been carrying in every muscle of my body. "It's finished. Safely." He arrived an hour later, exhausted in a way I'd never seen from him, dark circles beneath his eyes, his usually immaculate composure visibly frayed at the edges. He didn't explain exactly what finished meant, and I found, somewhat to my own surprise, that I didn't press him for details I suspected I genuinely didn't want. "You're safe," he said, pulling me into his arms the moment the door closed behind him. "Completely safe. The Castellano leadership has agreed to terms that ensure neither you nor Bianca will be targeted again. What kind of terms? The kind that don't require you to know the specifics. He pulled back to look at me, exhaustion and something considerably softer mixing in his expression. I am sorry, Elise. For all of it. For the danger my world brought into your ordinary, good life. Your daughter is alive because of a decision I made in about 2 seconds without thinking it through at all, I said. I don't regret that decision. I'm not going to start regretting everything that came after it either. Something shifted behind his eyes, careful control giving way to something rawer and more honest than I'd yet seen from him. I love you, he said quietly. I have known it for weeks and been too much of a coward, in every other way an unusually fearless man, to actually say it. I love you too, I whispered, and meant it completely, despite every reasonable instinct that should have made loving him considerably more complicated than it somehow, impossibly, felt. The months that followed unfolded with a rhythm I couldn't have predicted 6 weeks earlier, watching a stranger's daughter get dragged toward a van in a farmer's market parking lot. I kept my teaching position, though a quiet, permanent security presence became simply part of my ordinary daily life, the way some people learn to live with any other necessary accommodation. Bianca, thrilled beyond measure that her father and her superhero were now, in her own words, definitely in love, appointed herself flower girl for a wedding that hadn't yet been proposed, drawing elaborate pictures of the ceremony she was already certain was coming. She wasn't wrong. Matteo proposed nearly 8 months after that first knock on my door, in the same small park near the farmer's market where everything had actually begun, kneeling in the grass with a ring that caught the late afternoon light while Bianca, in on the plan for weeks, watched from a nearby bench with barely contained delight. I once told you, Matteo said, that a man in my position rarely gets to want things simply and openly. You changed that, Elise. You changed nearly everything I believed about what I was permitted to want out of my own life. Is that a proposal or a business summary? I asked, laughing through sudden tears. Both, he admitted, something warm and unguarded crossing his face. Marry me. Let me spend the rest of my life being worthy of the woman who tackled a stranger over a table of tomatoes without a single moment's hesitation. I said yes before he'd even finished the sentence. We married the following spring in Conchetta's garden, a considerably smaller and more careful gathering than the kind of wedding his family's standing might otherwise have demanded, exactly the way I'd asked for and exactly the way, I suspected, some quiet part of Matteo had wanted all along. My sister stood beside me, still slightly disbelieving that her cautious younger sister had ended up here, married to a man whose bodyguards discreetly ringed the property's perimeter throughout the entire ceremony. Bianca, 7 years old by then, scattered flower petals with the exact same fearless enthusiasm she'd apparently brought to every single moment of her short, remarkable life. Matteo waited for me at the altar with an expression I'd come to recognize as entirely, unguardedly his own, nothing like the careful composure he wore for the rest of the world. You're not what I expected my life to become, he murmured once I'd reached him. Neither are you, I admitted. I was supposed to be buying peaches. His laugh, rich and completely genuine, was the sound I'd fallen in love with somewhere in the careful, dangerous, unexpected months between that first knock on my door and this quiet garden ceremony neither of us had any right to expect. 2 years after that farmer's market morning, I sat in my classroom grading spelling tests when my phone buzzed with a text from Matteo. Come home early tonight. I have something I need to tell you in person. Good news or bad news, I typed back, my heart already picking up its pace the way it still did, even after everything, at the particular weight his messages sometimes carried. The best news, he replied. Please hurry. I found him in our kitchen when I arrived, uncharacteristically nervous in a way I'd rarely seen from a man usually defined by his composure, a small velvet box sitting on the counter beside him that clearly wasn't a ring, since I already wore one. What is it? I asked, setting down my bag. He opened the box to reveal not jewelry, but a tiny pair of knitted booties, and I understood, in the space of a single held breath, exactly what he was telling me before he managed to find the words himself. You're going to be a father again, I said softly. We're going to be parents, he corrected, pulling me into his arms with a gentleness that still, after everything, occasionally caught me completely off guard. Bianca's superhero is going to have a sibling to protect too. I laughed through sudden, overwhelming tears, thinking about the particular, impossible chain of decisions that had led me here. A Saturday morning peach basket dropped without thought, a stranger's daughter's small hand gripped tightly on a curb, a knock on my door I could have easily, reasonably ignored. I never planned any of this, I told him, my face pressed against his chest, listening to the steady, familiar rhythm of his heartbeat. No, Matteo agreed, his voice thick with something between laughter and genuine, overwhelming emotion. But I think, perhaps, some of the best things in life are never actually planned at all. They simply require someone brave enough to act in the 2 seconds before thinking it entirely through. If there's one thing this story leaves me with, even now, it's exactly that. Courage rarely announces itself with fanfare or careful calculation. Sometimes it looks like dropping a basket of peaches and running toward danger without a single thought for the consequences, and sometimes, if you're impossibly, unexpectedly fortunate, those consequences turn out to be the entire rest of your life, arriving unannounced at your door one ordinary Saturday night. Thank you so much for staying with me for this story. If you enjoyed it, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories just like this one. Let me know in the comments what you thought and what kind of story you'd like to see next. Until then, stay brave, stay kind, and never underestimate what 2 seconds of courage might actually build.